I knew if I picked up my cell phone and started talking, I would learn things that I couldn't learn without talking about it. Because I couldn't think beyond just the initial thought that I stated at the start of this video, that men and women are different in how they bring children into the world. It's literally the two extremes of what they love that Charlie had described, of what anybody loves. Love of food versus love of God. And it's one or the other that brings children into the world, based on what gender is the individual, and that's the difference between genders, is how they bring children into the world. They either love God if they're a woman, or they either love God if they're a man, or love food if they're a woman. And, I always felt that these people who want to have a sex change are lying to themselves. And so this is how the lie goes, I guess, without really thinking about it, just based on a presumption of inference. Anywho, but this is very relevant because it indicates how to bring a family, or how does a family operate? You have to love food. Why do fathers get pot bellies? Because they love food. Or else they wouldn't be a father to a family. This is very, it's Charlie did say one thing about the genders. When the first Adam and first Eve were formed from an androgynous humanity, who were capable up to that time of polyps. They would have a polyp develop on the side of their body, and when it developed far enough, it would drop off into the earth as a cocoon surrounding the new forming individual. And then after a certain length of time, the cocoon would break open and the individual would leave the cocoon and walk away. And there was no family. It didn't exist. It was merely, if there was any family, the family was simply this individual forming inside or as part of a polyp attached to the body of that individual and that androgynous individual. It would fall off when it developed as a polyp far enough and immerse itself in the earth, develop further, and then just break out of its cocoon and walk away, and that was it. So it wasn't family life per se as we know it. But the earth was going through so many changes and instabilities that a lot of life was lost when those cocoons were in the earth. And so to prevent that, it was decided that new life should be carried within the individual to full term. And that's when one androgynous individual took 1,000,000 years to develop female sex characteristics, and another individual took 1,000,000 years to develop male sex characteristics, and the first Adam and the first Eve were born of that transformation of those two androgynous individuals, so that they no longer needed to, or no longer were capable of, polyp form of progenitoring the new life, procreating the new life, however it's supposed to be used, whatever right word I'm supposed to use, I don't know. So the way he defined woman is that the woman was the androgynous individual who chose to carry the new life within herself to term. Because when you think about it, the amniotic sac is that cocoon, the very cocoon that Charlie Lutz was describing. The polyp had formed around itself when it broke away from its parent body, its parent androgynous body, and fell into the earth. And the earth became the womb. Isn't that what a fertilized egg does when it's fertilized by sperm? It inserts itself into the tissue interior of the womb and it lives there for 9 months. So the polyp must be a pre-fertilized egg stage of development, and when it falls off the androgynous individual, it becomes a fertilized zygote. And the being in the earth is the gestation period, and breaking out of the cocoon is birth. That must be the analogy of how it works in that prior era when humanity were all androgynous. And he said eventually we'll become androgynous again. It'll take 1,000,000 years from now, and we'll become spiritual at that point. And maybe we'll go back to being that format of bringing new life into the world in a physical manner. But see, I'm trying to make a distinction now between men and women because there are men and women. So that means that in androgynous individuals there's no distinction. In other words, there's no specialization as to how they bring new life into the world. So if that's the case, they have both options available. That if they're not enlightened, they use the polyp version because they have no choice to do it any other way. And as an enlightened person, the physical method shuts off. And I know this because, and they have only the cloning method, the siddha method, available to themselves. And I know this because, why do I know this? Because from my perspective, when I went through the phase transition of beginning to become enlightened when I was 19, and I never went through with it because I objected, one of my objections, I had 3 of them, was that I did not want to lose my capacity for sex, for sexual production of new life, because it was shutting down. And I knew that this was a sacrifice, a choice that a person made, actually. I wouldn't call it it was a sacrifice for me that I didn't want to make. In other words, a choice that I did not want to make, which didn't mean I wanted to have children. It just meant I didn't want to give up the possibility of having children through that method, through the method of sex. So I objected, and that was one of my 3 objections. So I never went through with the stabilization process and become fully enlightened. Instead of, the phase transition, you're starting to open up the crown chakra, but I never let it stabilize. And things work by trends. You either go one way or the other way. And since I turned away from God, I pretty much turned away from having any faith or belief that I could reach enlightenment. So that resulted in not pursuing it, because I had been up to that time. That was my birth motive. My only reason for living was to reach God. And anything else was extra and optional and after that. That was my outlook as a 5-year-old. I knew that. I knew what my duty in life was, my dharma. But I've never been that way ever since, because I had self-doubt. I questioned whether or not I was sincere about reaching God, or am I just running away from my problems? So I had various blocks. But choosing not to be sexually active anymore at the cellular level, not just as well as the behavioral level as well, was not something I wanted to choose to do. So I'm literally in a situation in which I love food and I don't love God. That's the problem. And it means I have death to look forward to and rebirth, because I'm not interested in overcoming the cycle of rebirth that we are subjected to due to our not being enlightened when our body dies. So this is interesting that I guess I've figured out what makes men and women different. But as Charlie said, it was simply out of expediency because the earth was so unstable. Now it's stable, so we don't have the problem. But going back to that is slow. And we also have to stop fighting and killing each other. It's not going to. That's a form of instability.